Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Gabriel Allen Cummings.
And I'm Sonika Garcia, and this is Breaking the Code,
a podcast series by the Havas Medical Anthropology team. We're here to take the BS out of behavioral science by illuminating the why behind the what of behaviors, rituals, and symbols that people take for granted. We hope to arm you, our listeners, with the tools you need to make sense of behavioral science and help you apply it to your work, communication extraordinaires. So welcome back, everybody. Today we have a special segment that we're looking to start off called Rip from the Headlines. And as the name suggests, we are reading a story and we're going to just read and react to it, really apply a medical anthropology lens to a story in health, in this case, that we're seeing. So Sonika, you're the one who found the article. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, thanks so much. Props to Jenny. I think she found it. It was an article that was published in Vogue towards the end of June, I believe. And it's basically covering this new breast cancer vaccine that's in phase 1 of development. I believe it's Anixa Biosciences or Biosciences. They're partnering with the Cleveland Clinic to basically bring this vaccine, hopefully, to the population, basically a breast cancer vaccine, 3 doses, 2 weeks apart. And ultimately, it targets a milk protein that's formed or found in the body during lactation. If it's found in the body outside of lactation, then that alerts, that's potentially be cancerous. And so the body, after you get the vaccine, it's trained to target these protein cells when they see it. Okay, also sorry if I'm butchering the science. This is just my medical anthropologist understanding of it. But basically, it trains your body to target the proteins if they see them, and to kill them, basically killing, the normal cells, but also potentially cancer cells. And it's not for, every breast cancer. This is for triple negative breast cancer. I think at first the headline just had the word cancer and vaccine together, and it was shocking and also exciting. And Gabe, what were your initial reactions when you saw that?
I mean, it was like my initial reaction, and it's kind of stuck with me throughout. The idea of cancer vaccine being next to each other kind of just, it takes my mind to like a future with flying cars. It doesn't feel like something that I was like meant to see in my lifetime, like Jetsons stuff or, again, just like really far in the future, just unbelievable how it got there. And I kind of put that initial shock aside and put my medical anthropologist cap on, and I begin to think about how a cancer vaccine is kind of different from how vaccines are usually rolled out and what they're usually created for. Usually like viral diseases, and they're usually made as a public good. They're kind of released to say, hey, look, measles, polio, COVID. You need to take this vaccine, not just for yourself, but for your fellow human being. I don't know if that's going to be necessarily the case with cancer in a traditional sense. I do think there is a public good to being vaccinated for cancer, but it may be more like a family emotional thing. So I'm wondering how the narrative around vaccines will change when it comes to this cancer vaccine. Sonika, what did you think?
Totally. No, those are amazing points. I mean, yeah, like all of that. But yes, like you, I was just like, cancer vaccine, this is life-changing. It's going to be life-changing for so many people. I think at first I immediately went to, I'm so used to talking about vaccines in the space of COVID. We've done an episode on it. We've done a lot of research on it, anti-vax, vaccine hesitant. And I was like, I don't think the cancer vaccine is going to meet someone who's anti-vax. Like, who is going to say, no, thank you. I don't want a vaccine that could potentially prevent me from getting breast cancer. But I think it's also going to, then I thought about it from the lens of, how is this going to change the way that we look at preventative health overall? This whole idea of like lifestyle meets medicine. So I thought about the stigma a little bit, right? We think about vaccines and, cancer specifically. Currently, without there being a prevention per se, the only prevention to cancer is, and this is still up in the air, right? I mean, it's not up in the air, but in the sense of like, I can, eat a clean diet, I can not smoke, I can work out regularly, and I can help prevent myself from getting cancer. That's the understanding, and that's what many people do. There is a lifestyle component of being a healthy person and preventing it. Now, there's going to be there's a medical intervention and potentially you don't need to do all those things. I don't know. You get the vaccine, you're training your body. Well, where does the other stuff now fit in? So, I mean, that's a larger discussion, but then my mind started going there just because I do remember during COVID, those who were anti-vaccine, anti-COVID vaccine, they were like, well, I'm a healthy person. I do all the things. I'm not going to get COVID. Even if I do, I'm going to beat it. I'm not going to die from it. And there was a lot of stigma around, well, if you died from COVID or you got really sick and hospitalized, it was because you were an unhealthy person. You made lifestyle choices that kind of got you there. And so just thinking back to what that whole mess of a narrative was like at that time, I was just like, how is this going to play in the cancer space as well? So I mean, a lot to consider. But to that point, I think one of the first things that I also thought of was, in a more positive lens, it was like, this is going to completely revolutionize and impact women's health, and really just like rewrite the story of women's health. I think from the standpoint of women's health has always been very like about reactive vigilance, right? So like, making sure that you are doing the things to prevent cancer and getting sick, not just cancer. I mean, everything in women's health, it's now moving more to like a proactive prevention standpoint. So I just, from a cultural standpoint too, just want to call out when we compare women to men and, a lot of what that culture narrative is like, we hear, men, they don't go to the doctor, they don't, do things proactively for their health. But I think women and having this pressure of we have to be in this responsibility of having to be really on top of every aspect of your health, whether it's your mental health, your physical health. So like, are you working out and what the body image looks like? And then, your reproductive health and what's going on inside your body. There's so many things that you have to keep tabs on. I wonder from a cultural standpoint, and maybe we do another episode on this, but it's, the fact that women and being mothers and just this whole idea of nurturing and taking care of and preventing disaster, if you will. So I feel like the women's health narrative is very much around, are you getting regular screenings? Are you, doing self-screenings, also going to the doctor? If you're a woman, did you see your PCP in the year? Did you see your OB in the year? Like there's so many boxes to check to make sure from a prevention standpoint that we don't get sick. And so now is it one less thing off of a woman's plate when it comes to health? And that's pretty empowering. It's a tool that's going to change the way that women's health, I think, is viewed and how women experience healthcare. And then, to get to a really important point that you kind of touched on in your immediate reaction, you talked about the fact that, yes, the cancer vaccine is very personal and maybe it's not this like do it for your community because it's not like transmittable in that way, but the fact that that still is going to benefit communities. So like you were kind of talking about like trajectory of families, right? Like talk a little bit about that because I think that's a really important point.
I mean, yeah, and it's something that I was thinking about, of course, off the immediate reaction. It's something where it's like, okay, well, as you just said, Sonika, cancer is not transmittable the way that COVID is, right? I don't have to wear a mask around someone who has cancer, and I'm not scared of transmitting it to anybody else like that. But the idea that cancer is a public and a social issue, I mean, that comes down to how we talk about cancer on this podcast, how cancer is viewed very publicly. It's people are afraid of cancer in a way that they aren't of other things. And this is like generation after generation after generation. And so when you have a vaccine that's able to do that, that's a public good as far as like you talk about family trajectories. You now have people who are able to live longer. You're prolonging life. You're prolonging being able to earn income, make wealth. And it's really creating opportunities for a lot of people socially. Well, it's not like you're directly going to get me sick. The world is a better place when there's a vaccine for cancer.
Yeah, so well said. And I think, from a psychological burden standpoint too, which you were just kind of touching on, it really just reduces that like looming fear. Breast cancer is something that women think about a lot. And whether or not you get it or what age you get it, the fact that it's something that you fear compounds over time on our body. We wear fear. that psychological burden can weigh on you physically. And it's something that women have to think about, this need for constant vigilance and constant screenings. And so even just the reduction of the psychological burden, I understand it's only one type of breast cancer. However, if this is successful, probably other breast cancers will follow suit. And so just thinking more long term, the reduction of psychological burden is also going to have a lot of physical impacts on health that are going to be, really beneficial.
And that's just one of the truths about cancer, right? And
Yep.
the idea that it's looming. Everybody
Yep.
has a story. They know somebody, a friend of a friend that's been affected by cancer. And so, even when we're talking about the idea of it being, feared or looming, it's very tangible. It's very public as far as conversations go. This is one type of breast cancer, as you said. But I think the word cancer kind of is what casts that big, long shadow over everyone's life. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And so yes, this is going to be, positive in so many ways and have just such large impacts on women's health and just, yes, health in general. I did have some considerations though from like a health equity standpoint. The prevalence of triple negative breast cancer, it's higher on younger and also women of, racial minority groups. So Hispanic and Black women is just, higher prevalence, like many cancers. It kind of follows suit. So given that, and younger, and like call out on younger, and I say that because I think there's a breastfeeding dilemma that comes into play, right? Like if you get the cancer vaccine, before having children, you won't be able to breastfeed, as I understand it, because your body will kill the lactation protein that will prevent that. Now, it goes back to the question of, okay, well, if someone is presented with, I can potentially prevent cancer, and then I'm giving up being able to breastfeed, that's a very individual decision to make. However, when we think about the larger health equity space for marginalized populations, younger moms, breastfeeding is a way, if you can do it, it saves money, right? Formula costs money. Although there are assistance programs, it still costs money. And so from that standpoint, how will that play out? And how can I don't, there's, yes, just how will that play out? What will be people's decision-making process? Will women save this for after they have children? But now that we know that women are having children later also, so how does that play a role? So there is, like anything good, there will be some sort of dilemma in just that, from that decision making standpoint from a health equity lens. So I just didn't want to leave that out of the equation because I think it's important to consider.
And
okay.
As someone who's not a mother, I also just want to jump in and make the assertion that breastfeeding is an emotional experience for mother and child, and there's like that connection there. And so it's, the balance of a cancer vaccine decision in this case, this breast cancer in particular, and then the ability to breastfeed a child, I imagine will be a pretty just emotionally tense decision as well.
Yes. That's such a good point. And there's the emotional aspect as well. So even if it's not just monetary, it's you're missing out on something that is sort of like a once in a lifetime opportunity for when you have children. And that could also have impacts. We talk about the psychological burden. What's the psychological burden associated with not being able to have the breastfeeding experience? So this stuff goes pretty deep. And I think it's really interesting. But Gabe, I'm going to kick it over to you. Let's talk a little bit about, we're medical anthropologists. A big part of what we do is understanding culture, larger cultural category, culture for certain categories. And so let's talk a little bit about vaccine culture. What do we need to be thinking about here?
So one thing, and this is like beyond an initial takeaway for me, but it's something that I'm curious about and curious for your thoughts on, Sonika. When I think about vaccines, of course, like health and vaccines are maybe the peak or pinnacle of this in my mind. The idea that health makes life easier, and to the point that generations as they go on, they don't even realize how their life is easier. Of course, mom and dad will always make sure to let you know that you have it much easier than they did. And that's kind of a point of pride. And that's where I want to get to. But even in thinking about vaccine space, and this is aside from cancer, was having a conversation with my little sister the other day, and I was like, just in passing, said, "Yeah, you were probably vaccinated for chickenpox." I mean, everybody older than me probably knows what chickenpox is. Probably had chickenpox at some point.
Yeah,
She's
I did.
15. She looks at me. I mean, she's 15, and you won't believe that she looked at me and she said, "What are chicken pox? What are
Oh my
those?"
God.
You know?
Wow.
And I mean, look, I never had the chicken pox. I was vaccinated for it when I was a kid. I only know about chicken pox and know stuff about it just because I was young enough to see like still TV shows and reruns of old shows where kids would have chicken pox. There'd be the chicken pox episode where it goes around the siblings, family, everything like that. But I think that's just, it goes to show the impact of vaccines and how it makes the human experience easier. And
Hmm.
the thought that bridges from there is like, sometimes, and we see this in the GLP-1 space too, when we have a medicine, I have a health finding, a yeah, a finding or something like
An
that that just
intervention
makes,
of some sort. Yeah.
right, that makes life easier, people tend to have a bit of an issue with that. And
Hmm.
it's not an issue of like, it's an issue of moral, like, you're not working as hard as I
Yep.
did. You're not, in the GLP-1 case, it's you're not doing the workouts and the caloric, intakes and all
Hmm.
the different sacrifices that I put into it. And you could even go back to the example I was talking about at the beginning, where mom and dad will say they went up and down the hill to go to school. And because you take the bus, it's all of a sudden easier and implied to be less valuable. I think it's such an interesting, it's an interesting point to make when we're talking about health. And as someone who designs games, it really triggers my brain in a certain way when people call things like GLP-1, when people call things like vaccines or cheat,
Hmm.
um, just because it's this idea that like health is not a game in the sense that it's like, how people typically say that something is not a game and it should be taken seriously, but also in the way that we are not players with constructed rules that we consent to in order to follow along with. However, someone's able to lose weight, GLP-1, weight
Yeah.
loss journey, the running and everything like that, exercise way, like literally whatever floats your boat should be
Yeah.
the answer. And as like health communicators, I think it's important that we understand like some of the logical fallacies that come up when people get caught up in their
Mm.
pride. So I'll pause there
Yeah.
just as like, because there's another conversation I'd like to have about like cancer and different titles, but I'll pause there as far as like it being a cheat and vaccines making health easier and somehow that being a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I think that with bringing it, well, first of all, yes, you heard that correctly. Everybody, Gabe designs games, and I'm yet to play one of these games. So we have to talk about that because Gabe is going to design like the next best board game that's on the horizon for him. But anyways, I think that yeah, it's a really important point. I think the GLP-1 space and everything that we and understanding that's different from cancer, obviously, but just the whole idea of like everyone's story is different, everyone's decision making process is different. We throw around the term personalized health like it means nothing these days, but that really is what it means. Health is so personal, and that decision making is just so different from between people, and the stigma around the fact that you didn't work hard enough for something or it's an easy way out. It's something that it's not just specific to any one category, but really just a human truth, to your point.
So first I'll say thanks for the special shout out on the fact that I design games. Yes, I amateur game designer is like what I like to go by because nothing has made it out of my room yet. But I really want to go into this other point where we had an episode a while ago where we talked about cancer and we talked about all the titles that people get for their cancer experience, survivor, fighter, warrior. And even though I said all that stuff before about how, health being easier is kind of the point of health advancements and interventions, I do think that there could be something lost here when we have cancer vaccines. This idea of someone being a fighter, someone's being survivor, like humans celebrate resilience and overcoming. And with a cancer vaccine, it is a way that life gets easier. And it's a way that that conversation may change
Hmm.
pretty fundamentally in a sense that it's like, you're no longer going to see people winning or losing their battles with cancer. And I mean, personally, I tend to have a problem when, people are turning cancer into like war metaphors and things like that. It's just a lot of added pressure. And that's something that we saw and discussed in the previous episode. I think it's something important to acknowledge that there is something lost here from like a human spirit. And I'm being purposely ambiguous here, that it's not something that we have to endure with. And there's part of me that's like, that's great. But there's another part of me that's like, I do understand where people are coming from not like you're a moral failing for you're morally failing for taking a vaccine, but like there are stories and people, there is a lot of good that has come from cancer survivors and the coming together of a community. I think there's a solidarity piece that may be lost here too, where when people struggle, it brings them closer together. I mean, we could just come closer together on other things, I think is the ultimate solution here. But I think there is something important to like the culture of cancer and the culture of cancer communities and really disease communities as vaccines begin to come up and diseases get eliminated. That is like human, very human.
Yep. Yeah. And not to be like, oh, well, on the other side of the coin, but I think that's an important part of the conversation. But the whole idea of the fact, I mean, this cancer vaccine is not going to then, make everyone stop worrying about cancer. It's one cancer. It's not even all breast cancer. And I think women will still, it'll take a lot from a scientific advancement standpoint for us to really change the mindset around like hypervigilance on our health and prevention and all of that. But, I do wonder, like at least from like a breast cancer screening, you do your at home, your tests at home, and then you go every year for your mammogram after you reach a certain age. How will that stuff change? And will there be a more relaxed attitude about it? What are again, all to say that in the communication, when this vaccine comes out, and again, it's only phase 1, but when that happens, I'm sure as healthcare marketing, communication agencies, whoever's job it is to market this vaccine, communication around like what that means. It's the first, and there's a lot riding on behavior around vigilance. And so the communication around that is going to be really important. How do we get people to, feel the benefits of this and acknowledge that it's something significant while at the same time making sure that it doesn't jeopardize the progress that we've made in how important prevention screenings are, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I think that that's a nice segue into what we want to talk about next, as far as like, I guess, we talked about the breast cancer vaccine. We kind of broadened the aperture to talk about cancer vaccines in general. And now we're talking about like to the dear communicator who will be, marketing a cancer vaccine sometime in the future. What do you need to keep in mind? And one part that we like to really like hit as part of medical anthropology is this conversation around fear and how that influences behaviors, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think just zoomed out, I mean, emotions in general, like what emotions are, how are emotions driving certain behaviors? Because we know that emotions are, drive 95% of the decisions that we make, if I think that's the latest stat. But we have an episode on fear. I think that for sure, fear isn't always a good motivator. But in the vaccine space, fear tends to work simply because fear is a good motivator for short-term, immediate action. So if this is a long-term, let's say, cholesterol awareness prevention and something that you have to do for years and years and years of your life, you can't use a fear tactic to get someone to maybe eat healthier, exercise regularly. However, if it's about taking an action to get a vaccine that you could do tomorrow, yes, fear could be a good motivator for behavior change or behavior supporting a certain behavior. So I think fear could work in this case, given the immediacy of action, and also the general culture of fear on certain illnesses. So we've established that fear is very much at play in the cancer space. Fear is not at play, I'm not going to say measles. I feel like measles is entering an interesting space with all these new outbreaks. But let's say like tuberculosis or smallpox or rubella, these things that are eradicated. There's no fear around it, and that's where you sort of see, the vaccine hesitant anti-vax movement. But cancer is extremely feared. And I think that again, this is why I hypothesize that I don't think the breast cancer vaccine will have so much of an anti-vax, vax hesitant movement. Because back in the day, death was pretty much happening and very imminent for a lot of these conditions. And so people viewed them as extremely threatening, and that pushed people to get these vaccines. And that was a strong motivator, and people did it. Now we're in a different place, right? Like I said, people aren't fearing a lot of these illnesses.
Yeah.
I mean, COVID as an example, right?
Right. I was about to say, you take COVID as the example, and you have some people, even though, to your point, there were millions and millions of people dying from COVID. There were some people who just weren't afraid of it. And it was partially because they trusted their own immune response and really kept to themselves in this personal way where it's like, I don't fear COVID because it won't hurt me. When, again, like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, the idea of COVID, the vaccine, at least part of the communication about the COVID vaccine, I think we had an episode about it. If not, maybe it'd be worth revisiting because there's a lot that was said about it. Just the idea that it's a public good, and some people didn't really believe in that. And so what it exposed for us is, kind of doing a retrospective right now about it, is that there's a privilege for some people not fearing death. And it's like an immuno health privilege that they're able to walk around without masks or walk around unvaccinated. And, they may get COVID at some point or they may not, but it's not even a perception of running the risk of it as much of it's just like, I'm just going to live my normal life. And now there was like in the United States, at least, there was a whole political aspect to it too, where it's like which side of you stood on, which we won't get into. But the idea that people didn't fear COVID was always an interesting thing that came out of it. That I am curious, to your point about anti-vaxxers all the way at the top, Sonika, I'm curious if that will be similar, just because cancer is so ubiquitous.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. We can't say for sure, but this is what I think the larger implication for medical anthropology, honestly, healthcare communication in general. We all need to be thinking as behavioral strategists, even outside of our discipline. And so culture is rapidly evolving. The fact that just 3 short years ago, we were having a completely different conversation about vaccines. And now we're like, forget about having, an anti-vax conversation. There is not going to be anyone who's anti-vax, or this vaccine is going to completely reshape the mindset around vaccines, even, the mindset that existed even previously. And for those people who are currently anti-vax, how is that shift going to happen? Or even currently vaccine hesitant, what are they going to say? I have people that I've spoken to about it that I know are vaccine hesitant, and based on their behaviors with the COVID vaccine, and their reaction to this one is very different. The things that were questioned with the COVID vaccine are simply not at play, which is funny because it's like, well, it's still science and it's still the same things, but the questioning is very different. So we can't say for sure, but I definitely think that we stay on top of this as something that's going to be rapidly evolving, and as this moves on to next phases. But ultimately, just to say, culture is so dynamic. And so even things that have, even categories that have really had this very strong embedded culture, it can change. Human beings are complex, and we make that point all the time. So yeah, I'm just excited to see where this goes, and continuing the conversation around it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. Honestly, I'm still kind of hooked on the idea of seeing cancer vaccine in a headline. And then the nerd medical anthropology part of me is I can't wait to see what happens when this hits the public, as far as how many different behavioral routes, how many different justifications are people going to make. We had last episode talking about inertia and how people, maybe use a bit of false logic to justify their behaviors. And I'm sure we'll see a lot of that with a cancer vaccine. It's a fascinating space that we have to continue to track for sure, because I'll be tracking it definitely privately, kind of just looking every day to see what's new.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's gonna be one to definitely keep tabs on. So thanks for listening, everyone. This is just, we figured why not have this conversation on the podcast, and we have it anyway, and it's fascinating. And again, there's so much to consider about this topic. So thanks, Gabe. This was a very good discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Sonika.
I enjoyed it.
everyone listening, if there's any kind of headline that you see that you'd like to rip down and send over to us, feel free to do it. medicalanthropology@avast.com. We look for this stuff all the time, but of course, we're just two of us, so we don't see everything. So if there's anything you'd like to see two of us kind of break down in a similar way that we just did here, kind of just tossing ideas back and forth, feel free to send us a note.
Great. Okay. Well, until next time, I'm Sonika Garcia.
And I'm Gabriel Allen Cummings. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening.
Breaking the Code is a podcast by the Havas Medical Anthropology Group. Hosted by Sonika Garcia and Gabriel Allen Cummings, with inspiration coming from all of you. Thank you for listening and for your continued support. If you enjoyed this episode or had any questions for the team, feel free to leave a rating, subscribe, and send us a message to our mailbox at medicalanthropology@havas.com. Until next time.